Just sending some messages, so people should know. Um, so yeah, I think I don't know why, but so let me. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yes, sir. So it's 6 o'clock, and maybe we shall start now. So, a very ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ, ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತ. A very warm welcome to this evening program with Dr. R. Balasubramaniam, a very well-known uh, development activist, if I can say so. More importantly, founder of the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, Gram institution, as well as author of several books. And today, what we shall be doing as part of our Indian Institute of World Culture program is to be able to have a conversation with Dr. R. Balasubramaniam on this book that he has written called Leadership Lessons for Daily Living. So, on behalf of Indian Institute of World Culture, a very warm welcome to all the viewers who have joined us on Facebook and on YouTube, apart from the Zoom call. So, on that note, let me kind of quickly share with you that this book is a very interesting book. And if you can get hold of a copy, nothing like it. And to get the copy, you just need to get in touch with GRAAM, Grassroots Research and Advocacy Movement, GRAM, graam.org.in. That's the website. And what we have here is a beautiful book on understanding how we all can be a lot more effective, efficient, and productive in our efforts to make things happen, which essentially means to bring out the leadership within us. And this is the key insight that Dr. Balasubramaniam shares. And let me share that we have, as part of the table of contents, if I may kind of share this, I don't know how many people can see it, but there are over 27 chapters. And very interestingly, these are all small 3 to 4 page chapters. Each has a succinct leadership lessons, set of leadership lessons. And I think it will be very nice to introduce Dr. Balasubramaniam in a formal way. So let me just highlight some points from his brief bio, right? So, having embarked on a journey in the development sector by living and working for several years with the remote forest-based tribal communities in southern Indian district of Mysuru, Dr. Balasubramaniam is a widely respected development activist, leadership trainer, thinker, and writer. Okay. More importantly, he has been deeply inspired by the call of Swami Vivekananda to go serve the people and to ensure that in the act of serving the people, he is able to realize his higher self. So, Dr. Balasubramaniam has been able to combine a vast development sector experience of studying and teaching at the world's leading schools of policy and development, including Harvard and Cornell. He actually is a medical doctor by profession. Okay. Now, the founder of Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement and Grassroots Research and Advocacy Movement, Dr. Balasubramaniam, embodies a rare blend of grassroots and macro perspectives and policy formulation through his multifaceted experiences of more than 3 decades. He is currently a visiting professor at Cornell University in USA as well as at IIT Delhi, where he teaches courses on leadership. He coaches and mentors senior leaders in non-profit, corporate, government, and educational sectors globally, apart from running leadership workshops for people from these sectors. He has authored 7 books, both in Kannada and in English. And you should reach out to him, possibly to have your questions answered, to be in touch with him, and to go along with him in your journey at the website www.drbalu.com. So, on that note, I'd like to warmly welcome Dr. R. Balasubramaniam and request him, Namaste, sir, request him to share a 5 minute synopsis of what this book is all about, how he came about to write this book, and why it's very important for each one of us to know what we can take away, especially from today evening conversation at the Indian Institute of World Culture. Dr. Balasubramanian.
Thank you, Mohan, for inviting me to share my thoughts on this book, for your warm and generous introduction, and for giving me an opportunity, possibly, to explain a bit about this book. Leadership is a subject of everybody's interest. It's one subject where it's a very strange subject where everybody can feel like an expert and nobody can also be feel like an expert, or everybody is an expert, or there's actually no expert at all. It's one field where, if you're sick, you can go to a doctor. If you need to build a house, you go to a civil engineer. You have a problem in the public administration, you go to a bureaucrat. You want to understand politics, you go to a politician. But in everybody, there's something which is deeply embedded in them, which is across everybody, which I would say is leadership. And so it's such an important element that when I was looking at the space, and when apart from my studies, my research, and my fellowship at Harvard on the subject, I started understanding that most people who think they understand leadership, and it's very strangely unfortunate even in our country, that we think it's only the Western world which has deconstructed and understood leadership. For a long time, I also subscribed to that view, till I started understanding that India is possibly one of the greatest contributors to the subject of leadership, except that we never called it leadership.
Okay.
And since we didn't go with these labels, we never understood what is our real contribution. We always equate India to spirituality, culture, civilizational strengths, but the application of this culture, spirituality, and civilizational strengths in a Vyavaharik manner is never really connected and interpreted. So as I started going deep into my research, I realized most of the material that I was either reading from Western thinkers and writers or understanding from the space of the lens of a Western world was actually deeply Eastern ideas. Except that they may not have known it, whether it's our Upanishads or Bhagavad Gita or Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So I was always, one trouble that we don't have an Indian narrative of leadership. We always look to the Harvards of the world and think they can present a leadership package to us. Second, we always believe that leadership is something extraordinary. We always think it's only the CEO, the president of a country, or the prime minister of a country, or the chief minister of a state, or the head of a political party, the NGO head, and we always equate it to positions of power and authority. Little do we realize they're completely different. Also, authority is very different from leadership. People exercising leadership may have authority, may not have authority. But we don't spend time deconstructing all that. And then I used to always wonder that people inspired by Swami Vivekananda, and obviously my initial work was to understand him from a leadership lens, was the power and the attraction of his message was so powerful. When you start peeling out the different layers of his own message, the undercurrent was so strongly spirituality. And I was at a point of convergence where I started looking at leadership also as a journey in spirituality. The Vyavaharik manifestation of one's spiritual journey can be represented as leadership. And that's the message I picked from Swamiji. So I used to be looking around the world and thought ordinary people are exercising extraordinary acts of leadership, but they never get celebrated for it. So I started looking at this and learning from them. And every morning, me and my wife go out on walks, and COVID presented a great opportunity to make it more regular. And I travel a lot. Last 1 year, I couldn't travel much. So we used to do this, and every morning we would share lessons from each other's expertise. And she would talk to me a lot. She's a very keen history student, and though she's a doctor, she loves history. She used to tell me a lot about history. And I would share my little bits of leadership messages and knowledge that I got around from looking at people. So as this continued, she said one day that your messages are helping me a lot. It helps you think and rethink about how I lead my life. I think this deserves to be told to the world. So she pushed me to say, these thoughts need to be shared. So why don't you start writing? So that made me put them all together, and it came out as a book. And I
Wonderful.
realized that book should be different from my earlier books, because every book I would get hundreds of letters. My students, they become textbooks around the world in several universities. My own students read all those books. So they started giving me feedback on each book I brought out. One of the first book which became globally well-known, republished, was I, the Citizen. And that my students told, you have raised so many questions, but you allow the reader to find their own answers. They were
Right.
not very comfortable with it. So all the readers said, you tell us what to do. And in
Right.
my next book, Voices from the Grassroots, I said, these are voices of people, voices about development and policy, but I'm also adding my interpretation, my voice into the narrative. And they came back and told, no, that's not enough. You want a message that we can simply go back to second time, third time. We don't have to read the whole book. We just pick those messages and make it a lifestyle. And that's why the leadership book, if you look at it, there's a small quote from thinkers around the world, mostly Indian, whether it is the Gita, which is Krishna and the Gita, or Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, Ramana Maharishi, J. Krishnamurti, or leadership thinkers like Peter Drucker, Warren Bennis, and others, giving the message of the chapter inside. And there's an actual true life anecdote which I experienced myself, except in situations where I was an observer or a reader, like Swami Vivekananda's story I tell there, and then bring out the messages of leadership in an illustrative way, and end it with a set of lessons in the end of the chapter. So that has now become very popular, mainly because it's so easy to just go back and refer to it and say, oh, these are 3 things I shouldn't forget. In fact, one of my friends who bought the book, he actually sent me back my own book in a different style. He actually
Oh,
made a big Excel sheet and he put the chapter name, said the quote, how we found the connection, what were the lessons he learned apart from the ones I put out at the end of the book from the one chapter. And he said, I have now gift this printout from you, extract from your book to all my, as a New Year gift. That's what he gave out to all his friends. So
very nice.
it is
So
found
nice,
different
nice
ways.
workbook experience.
Sort
Wonderful,
of,
sir. Wonderful,
sort of,
wonderful.
sort of.
That's really nice. A beautiful, brief 5-minute summary on the genesis of this book called Leadership Lessons for Daily Living. Wonderful. So I would tell all the viewers who have joined online through Zoom, through Facebook, through YouTube, once more a very warm welcome to you all to this Indian Institute of World Culture program this evening. More importantly, we are going to have this conversation with Dr.R. Balasubramaniam for about 40-45 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. We'll be ending the program somewhere around 7 to 7:05 or maximum 7:10. All right. So on that note, Dr. Balasubramaniam, I wanted to ask you this question. You are a medical doctor. You got fired up by Swami Vivekananda's exhortations to you, and I read that you had been very inspired and influenced by his 2 small booklets, Call to the Nation and To the Youth of India, if I'm right. And you are a person who kind of roamed the streets of Basavanagudi, uh, had been at BMS College, was a regular at the Ramakrishna Ashram in Basavanagudi, right? And then you chose to suddenly become a medical doctor and went to Mysore. Am I right? So here comes the key point. Your ability to observe yourself, observe the circumstances, and then to be able to distill this wisdom. How did you get to cultivate it? Because as an author, you put certain insights and experiences in paper. But the bigger challenge is how did you develop the ability to observe, ability to digest and come up with the insights? How did you manage to get the wisdom to capture it in the everyday anecdotes that each one of us go through? See, all of us, somewhere deep inside us, like Swami Vivekananda says, the divinity has to be manifested, the leadership has to be manifested. So many of us are really wanting to understand this because it's a very, very important topic. Please, sir.
It's a great question. Sometimes I ask myself that, and I must confess, reflection, leadership is all about reflections, in a very real way. The whole book, if you understand it and deconstruct it, it's about reflective leadership. It's about becoming an observer to oneself, like Ramana Maharishi keeps talking about it. Bhagavan Ramakrishna says being a watchman to oneself. I never understood all this. They're just intellectual ideas when I read these works. I was privileged. I was extraordinarily privileged that by a divine sleight of hand, if you can call it, I had the privilege of studying under the feet of Swami Achalananji, who was very popular in the Bangalore ashram when Swami Yatishwaranji was there, and he was called Shauti Maharaj. He was chief engineer of the Madras presidency. He quit his job and then he took up sannyasa at the age of 53, 54, and lived in Mysore, the Ramakrishna Institute of Moral and Spiritual Education, which we used to then call Vedanta College. Accidentally met him in 1985 after 1 year of starting up the Vivekananda movement. I was 20 years when I met him for the first time. These things happen. In Viveka Chudamani, Adi Shankara talks about how you identify the guru or how does the Shishya get recognized, etc. And I thought it just happened. And Achalanji and I struck a special relationship. And I was privileged to have learned at his feet for 5 years.
Wonderful.
Beyond just scriptural understanding or the scriptural knowledge that he used to, I used to spend every day 2 hours with him. I have possibly been more regular sitting with him rather than attending medical college.
Oh.
And he gave me the real insight into the power of reflection.
Okay.
And so if people credit me with extraordinary reflective abilities, it is nothing but what he endowed in me. It is nothing but what he trained me to be. And
Okay.
I would say what you're seeing is all what he prepared me for.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So this ability to reflect, the ability to understand a certain nuanced, insightful overview of what's happening around is what enabled you to see through and then think through and then decide and exhibit the intrinsic leadership that every one of us have. So here's the question, sir. See, a lot of us kind of tumble along in life, if I may kind of use that phrase, tumble along, because it just happens. Everybody gets footballed around. There are so many crises and difficult circumstances and whatnot keeps happening all the time. So people just do not know how to respond to it. Many times they react to it. And most people, especially in India, we don't understand that this thing called leadership is something so very intrinsically important for each one of us to manifest our own strengths. So, how does one go about trying to uh, share with people the importance of cultivating and nurturing leadership qualities in each one of us? Because that's what this book is all about, right? Leadership lessons for
Daily
everyday
living.
life.
See, we need to demystify leadership, right? And I would begin with that. We have made it so mystified. Like every one of us, I think every Indian, if you ask me, who is an expert on cricket,
You're right.
we intrinsically believe, this is how Tendulkar should play, or this is how Virat Kohli should captain, or this is how this boy should have scored his case. We have an expert opinion about everything. And we all have grown up on the streets of our own cities or towns or villages with our own fabricated bats or bought bats and balls and sticks, and the wall becomes a stump, or you actually put 3 sticks. So we have all, in a sense, without our own knowledge, acquired the DNA of some understanding of cricket. And we start thinking this is how the game should be played, and we start showing expertise without recognizing we are not actually an expert. Now, I think when we see around the world and we see these people in positions of power, authority, and we see the word leader being used and thrown around, the mainstream idea of leader gets into our heads without our knowing itself.
Right.
Now, I'd like to demystify and say there is no word called a leader. I don't even believe in the noun form of leader. To me, Swami Vivekananda is not a leader. Swami
Right.
Vivekananda is an extraordinary person who exercised great leadership. So exercising leadership is different. Becoming a leader is different. What I'm now trying to say, it's not about being a leader, it's about becoming something much beyond a leader. That becoming is more important than being.
Rather, exhibiting the leadership qualities is more important
Not
than.
qualities, not even qualities. Let me
Okay.
clarify.
Right.
So it's not nothing to do with quality. These are all different theories of leadership as and when people understood it. Like Swami Vivekananda says, we move from one level of truth to the other. So as research
Right.
led us to believe the next level of truth, we talk about it for some time. So to
Right.
me, leadership is an activity.
Uh-huh.
It's a verb form. It's an activity of doing what? It's an activity of mobilizing oneself and people around us, a group of people around us, and their resources. Each of us bring a different resource table.
Right.
And after doing that, what you do with the mobilized resources, you do something societally constructive.
Right.
And you do this amidst enormous uncertainty. There's no guarantee that what you do is going to result in something. And that's the power of the Gita. We interpret
Right.
Gita as, you do your actions, but don't worry about the fruits of your action. So leadership is exactly like that. You should
Right.
not incentivize yourself with the end outcome, but with
Yes.
the joy of doing what you do, that activity of just doing good to society, and leave the outcomes to, if a person like me, to the Lord out there.
Right.
So in a simplified way, I would say leadership is a journey,
Yes.
it's an equation, it's a formula.
Right.
What do you do there? It's a formula of understanding oneself.
Right.
Understand who am I, what am I born for, what am I doing here, what is the context in which I'm operating, what is the
Yes.
role that I'm playing, and then understanding others around me. What is the relationship between them? What are the role relationships? And asking myself, what is the action that binds this self to the others around me? And that action is leadership. And in the
Okay.
language that I talk about, you don't have to be a 24/7 leader.
Right.
Sometimes you may opt to exercise leadership. Sometimes you may not want to do it. So it's very volitional.
Would you say it volitional, or is it something spontaneously that comes out because of the situation? Because
I think a man who's mindful will understand that in a particular context, let's say both of us are exposed to the same context,
right.
and in that context, if I perform as a leader, I will say it's my responsibility to do something right away and do it. But
Right.
that is not the right. I may not be the right person. But if I'm exercising leadership, I will
Right.
understand myself. I will understand others around me, and recognize that the other around me is a more competent person to be exercising leadership. I
Right.
will step back. I don't have to be a leader or exercise leadership at that point of time, and
So
allow the other to exercise his leadership and demonstrate success. So to
beautiful.
me, that is what matters, right? And that requires humility, that requires subsuming your ego. And that's why I call it a spiritual journey.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So there you are. So there's something called a leader, which is not what it is all about. What's more important is the ability to nurture and manifest, or should I say, bring out the leadership qualities, traits, abilities, or whatever, which comes out in the situation. And there you are kind of tuned into the situation. It's not the question of status, it's not the question of power, it's not the question of position, it's not the question of authority, right? And
Yes,
yet, it is what is needed for that situation. And from time to time, you offer because everybody looks forward to you to offering that. You do it and then you go on. That's it. So what happens happens, if I may kind of say so. And that spontaneity, that burst of creative thinking that happens on the fly, situationally, is what brings out the best of leadership, if I'm kind of say so.
I would add one more sentence to what is here and qualify the spontaneity and creativity may also let you decide that I'm useless in this context. I shouldn't do anything
Right.
whatsoever.
Exactly. Exactly. There, you're authentic to yourself. You're honest to yourself, saying that here's a problem that is there at hand. There are these 5-10 people around. Of these 5-10 people, I observe. Then I find that I can add value, so I add value, and therefore there's leadership that comes out because I've added value and it's positive and successful. And then I find that there are others who are better doing it. So what am I doing here? I have to be honest to myself. So I step back. So it's a question of something that's happening spontaneous. It's not something which is, what should I say, conscripted to some script that I am a leader, so I'm expected to act. I shall be seen as a leader, and if I don't keep up the image, then people will trash me later. These kinds of thoughts never ever occur, if I'm right, kind of say.
Exactly.
And that's something which I find very beautifully illustrated in your book. And let me ask this thing. Let's just jump into one of the chapters, okay? So let me take you to chapter 7. Now you have titled chapter 7 as exercising sustained leadership. And I'm sure you must have had a anecdote and you have juiced the leadership lesson from that. So as an author, we'd like to hear from you, the horse's mouth, Dr. Balasubramaniam. Please share it with our viewers in Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom.
See, essentially, leadership is about providing sustained presence.
Okay.
Whether when your team is succeeding or failing, you send out a subconscious message. It's okay to fail. It's
Right.
okay, and in failure lies success. You reshift the narrative and say, what did I learn from this failure? What did my team learn from this failure? How do I move on? Demonstrate poise, demonstrate
Right.
equanimity. So providing sustained presence is what I call sustained leadership. It's not sustaining it ever. And in
Right.
the particular case I saw, what really sparked off the thought in me, and I saw it around, and people can relate to everyday contemporary events. That's why I quote a contemporary event. Is our own prime minister. We equate him with a powerful person. We equate him as a prime minister, as a leader of a country. He's definitely occupying a position of authority, but he's also demonstrating leadership in several contexts. And in this particular context, I can give two examples. And though I didn't write about the second example, in the first example, when Dr. Shivan, the head of ISRO, and he was in tears because our scientists at ISRO are passionate. They put their hearts into competing with the rest of the world, and they really bring out such great intelligence, indigenous intelligence, which results in whatever they're doing, and such wonderful work that they're doing. I have a high regard for every scientist of ISRO. And Shivan, when it failed, he broke down. It was genuine. And then the prime minister also comes to see the launch, and the prime minister's presence itself is, to me, can be frightening. But the prime minister was such a that the presence was so invigorating and strengthening. He never took the scientists to task. He never called them a failure. He hugged Shivan, and that one response communicates everything, demonstrates poise, demonstrates support, shows that I trust you. And then he went back and he was very clear, and the way he spoke about it immediately is about, what do we learn from this? What does the whole country learn from this? So to me, he had an option. He could have simply said, what the hell happened? Or he could say, I'm sorry you failed, and just walked away. But he did.
Right.
In that one single moment, he understood the context. He understood himself. He understood the scientist and the head of ISRO, and the action that bound him to him, and the presence of sustained value that he gave. And followed it up later on. Many people, I've actually followed through. And so what happened to ISRO, what they never felt defeated. So
Right.
in the moment of defeat, he inspired them to look at victory which is ahead of them. And that is
Okay.
what I call sustained leadership. And
Beautiful.
similarly, that isn't it? That's what he did in COVID too. COVID, he
Right.
engaged, Prime Minister can't fight COVID. Health Minister can't fight COVID. Just the Health Ministry can't fight COVID. Every Indian needs to fight it. And that's exactly what is missing in us. We are not demonstrating leadership by wearing a mask, using sanitizers. We think COVID is gone and it's going to come back again now because of
Right.
just sheer negligence from our side.
Right.
But he made us feel involved. He said, it's your problem as much as mine. Come,
Right.
we might laugh at it and say, just banging plates or lighting lamps, what does it do? But he got us to join the battle.
Right.
And in that simple act inspired us and made us believe that, listen, I'm there for you. I will do what needs to be done. I will support the rest of the organizations. I will go visit our serum institutes and all those places to promote the scientists to make the vaccine faster. I will wear a mask myself. I will ensure that all of you do it, but all of you have to participate with me. So he shared the
Beautiful.
problem. And he
Right.
shared and said everybody is part of the solution. So to me, that was brilliant leadership. And that's why that chapter begins with an example
Beautiful.
of our own prime minister.
Yeah. Beautiful. So let me come back to the ground level. So this is about leadership lessons for our daily living. Our daily living. We have so many viewers who are all having their own challenges in life. I have my set of challenges too. And I would like to understand from you, sir, exhibiting that leadership uh, capability in our daily life, what exactly would that mean? More so because you took off from Prime Minister Modi, how he related to the situation at hand at that moment, because people were all expecting the lander to land, but then that didn't get to happen, right? So there is a situational leadership that has to take over, and he did it in such a spontaneous way that it touched the hearts of so many people. And then the same thing when it came to fighting the corona battle too. And he has done it such that the entire world is now really appreciative of him. So that ability to do it as part of your daily living, what does that mean? Because viewers would like to hear from you. How should they go about appreciating, understanding, and knowing the nuances of leadership in daily living?
We are all got so used to mediocrity. We've all got so used to everyday existence in a normalistic way. We get up in the morning. We all love comfort. And we
Right,
always think that we are all endowed with our abilities to deal with everything in our lives. And suddenly, when something shakes us, when something like life is rocked by a crisis, or even it could be like COVID or death in the family or a sickness in the family, we are struggling to find a solution. Then we start struggling to cope with the crisis. We don't really look at
Right.
solving the crisis at that moment of time. We try to cope first. What we don't recognize is every day presents us an enormous number of challenges. Because those challenges are easily overcome with the toolbox that we have built, we don't even see them as a leadership challenge or a solution opportunity. Only when we don't have the toolbox necessary for the repairs that are being demanded, then we get stressed and stretched. So
Yeah.
every small act, let's look at cooking in the morning. Any of us participating in cooking, giving our 100% to what we do is an act of leadership. But when we're cooking, we're thinking about whether sambar will be good, or whether my wife or my husband or my child will like this food, or when we are dressing ourselves up, do I look good? We forget about the act, the process, and start focusing on the outcome. Simple
Right.
acts, right? Very simple things these are. Can we look, Vivekananda says, I for detail. That is
Yes.
leadership too. The smallest act that we do, can we give our heart into it? Can we give our 100% into it? Can we just learn to live in the present and not keep running back to the past and live with the guilt of the past, or jumping into the present and looking into the consequences of the, sorry, jumping into the future and looking into the consequences of the future and worrying about it and being afraid of it? Can we just learn to live in the present? Very simple thing. The third, every time we do something, we ask a man, what are you doing? He said, I'm cutting vegetables. So we
Right.
always hold on to the I so strongly. We start thinking, I am solving the problem. I am resolving this crisis. Instead, can we shift the narrative and say the crisis needs to be resolved?
Right.
Then you will immediately ask yourself, how do I resolve this crisis? Am I the best person to be resolving this crisis, or somebody else better than me to resolve this crisis? What
Right.
other resources can I mobilize to resolve the crisis? So reframing the problem by removing I and shifting the focus to the work at the center, and not to I should be seen to be doing this work at the center. So can you keep the work at the center in your mind all the time during the day? That's a lesson for daily life. So very simple things like this. And when a person talks to you, our mind immediately interprets what he's saying. Can we appreciate and understand that our interpretation is not possibly the right story, maybe? It is a story that we are telling ourselves based on our experience of the past, based on all the way we have groomed and the baggages we are carrying. So, can we give ourselves the freedom to see what we see around us, all the data points, as just as data, and
Right.
step back from interpreting the data all the time? It's a very
Okay.
big ask. It's not easy. It sounds very simple when I say it. But in the book, I explain how do we, because we are all interpreting so fast that even before I complete my statement, our mind is already thinking about it. Can we
Right.
pause? Can we reflect? Can we learn to be an observer? Every action that we do, can we become mindful of ourselves and say, am I doing it by giving my 100%? So these are
Right.
very small acts every day from morning to evening we can
Beautiful.
do.
So that is the
And
thing.
yeah,
Leadership skills in our everyday living, the tips that you're talking about, like being mindful, like giving 100% of ourselves to the work at hand, like being observant to see what is it that we are adding as value, either we are becoming a little egoistic and therefore blocking possible resolution of the problem at hand, right? How to nurture the right interpersonal relationship so that it becomes simpler for us to do our best and allowing others to do their best. These kinds of things are very important. That's what you think. These are the tips, and we are all ordinary folks, right? We just don't what do you call, have these uh, providence or destiny defined situations like Prime Minister Modi hugging a Sivan or whatever. We do it in our own daily lives at home. If our
and
children or
everybody is great in his own place, is what Swami
exact,
Vivekananda says.
beautiful,
And we
beautiful.
have to believe in it,
Yeah, everybody is great in
in his
his
own
own
place.
place or her own place. That's a very interesting thing. Now, I just want to ask one more question, maybe one more chapter I'll just take, and then we will go to the question and answer session, right?
Yeah.
So here is a very interesting chapter that you had titled, right? And that is uh, um, say exercising. No, maybe I should talk about this particular thing, finding the leadership that India needs. It's your chapter 25, and it's about a crisis, a conflict, right? And you have been so very politically correct, if I may kind of say so, because you do not want to name names, you do not want to say so many things, but then it has happened, right? And it has touched a lot of ordinary people's lives, the violence, the riots, whatever it is. So, sir, quickly in a couple of minutes, just tell us what this is all about and what is the kind of leadership that India needs. How can I, as me as an
See,
ordinary Indian citizen, how can I apply myself to that?
I was hoping you would not raise this chapter, but since you raised it, I let me speak. And you're right. My intent is not to be politically right or politically wrong or not hurt somebody or hurt somebody. My very reason of writing this book is to keep my focus on the work at the center, which is sharing lessons of leadership. So if the sharing is itself, the intent is only sharing, it doesn't matter whether I have to name somebody or not name somebody. And then the responsibility of an author is always, unless you're surely taken permission of the person, or you are not saying something which is, defaming a person directly, you would like to take permission and then do it. So since I didn't have the opportunity to do it, and most of the observations are through the media, where I have only limited context of the event, but a little more understanding because of going deeper with research into it, I decided I'll hold back names. But when you read it, you know who I'm talking about. So you don't have to,
Sure,
like
sure,
you
sure,
yourself
sure.
said. But let's look at India. Look at this scene that I begin the chapter with. A 17-year-old young boy menacingly moving towards the group of people with a gun in his hand.
Okay, let's set the context because you should tell about the context. The context, if I can take only 10 seconds to tell, this is all about the riots that happened in Delhi about a couple of years back.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was because a lot of sets of people had their own make believe narratives that they believed in. And there was a lot of conflicts between these narratives. Each set of people thought that they were doing what is right? Meaning there's the set of people representing the government, and there's the set of people who are the ordinary human beings on the street, and there's a set of people who are protesting and rioting.
So
So there are
what
two
what
sets
hap-
of people.
what happens in these situations? And I have been a protester. I've been
And
an
as an
activist.
ordinary person, if I'm caught in that kind of a milieu, how do I show leadership skills and help resolve issues, or how do I survive, or how do I act with wisdom? That's the question to you. That's
So
what the chapter 25 is supposed to be, right?
it starts with that, but actually it's a much deeper message. It's not the right is
Right.
just an excuse to get people to connect or relate to it. See, most
Right.
of the time we are all armchair philosophers or street corner political experts and commentators.
Right.
We sort of dissociate from a problem which we think is so overwhelmingly big, it's not something I can solve. Or we become experts in commenting about it because it's not our own house or next door. So I wanted this message that the real message of polarization that's happening in society. Vivekananda talks of universal, he goes beyond tolerance. He says acceptance. I even think tolerance is one level of virtue, but acceptance is a higher level of virtue. But in a world, why aren't we even disagreeing? Because I see things from my lens. And my lens is not wrong. I believe that the lens is right. I have been colored with my own experiences, the baggages I'm carrying, that I don't like to want to be seen as objective. So I become so subjective in my own mind that I start believing what I know is what is right. So the reality is not leadership to me is the ability to recognize reality as close to reality as possible.
Beautiful.
Leadership is the ability to describe reality as close to reality as possible. Unfortunately, each of us build a reality of our own, and we are convinced that that is absolute reality. And so we start talking about it. Well, let's look at the Citizenship Act and the rights about it. I am a policy expert. I analyze policy. That's my other hat I wear. And when you analyze it, it's a small amendment that was done in the act. And we don't go into that level. Emotions are flared up, and I have my reality. And therefore, with that reality, I say, I'm going to be thrown out of this country, I'm going to be arrested, I'm going to be put into a refugee camp. All these kinds of narratives. Like in the United States, I remember when I was at Harvard at that time, Obama had just introduced the Healthcare Act, the Obamacare. And I attended town halls to understand how American citizens talk about it. And American citizens said the Obamacare is going to bring in death squads. And they are going to have a set of people sitting in every city or county deciding who's going to be pulled off the ventilator and whose life is going to be allowed to end without any medical treatment. All this kind of nonsense spread. And Obamacare was a brilliant act. Whatever happened to it later and all the politics of it, I'm not going to talk about it. There's something wrong. A few things maybe could have been better, but largely a lot of it was good. But nobody looked at it. Everybody talked about it from a lens of their own. Same thing happened in India. So I'm trying to tell people, it is not what you know. It's also understanding that what I know may only be one side of the story. Can I give myself the freedom and liberty to know more? Can I give myself the freedom and liberty to agree that other man might know more than me? Just because I don't agree with him, I cannot be dismissive of him and say he doesn't know enough. Or just because he doesn't sing my song, I can't say he doesn't know how to sing at all. So this is essentially, I quote a line from my own book. We need to come to terms with the difficulty of being honest with oneself and not lose sight of what one does not know.
Okay.
So being honest with oneself tells you how little you know or how much you know. And also what we know may not be the absolute truth. It's one level of reality. So to me, it is nothing but that Vivek Guna, the ability to separate out Maya, the illusion from the real, in a very deep sense. But in a very Vyavaharic sense, the ability to shift the grain from the shaft. And
Right.
understanding that I may be holding on to the shaft, the other man may have the grain. So giving ourselves the openness,
Right.
allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, allowing ourselves not to frame the narrative as convenient to me alone, but about as a solution to what needs to be done rather than what I should be doing. And what I will be doing will always be driven by my competence. Coming to terms with the simple understanding. If I were to frame it in one sentence, leadership is not just learning to operate from zones of your competence. Leadership is also having the ability to operate from zones of our incompetence.
Okay.
Well, the moment you allow yourself that freedom to be incompetent, then you understand there's so much more to learn. The moment
Right.
you allow yourself, I can learn from the man opposite me whom I think I don't agree with, then you understand that solving the problem is more important than simply solving it my way. You know,
Right.
that happened in an anti-corruption struggle. Some of the leadership, I was very close to the leadership and as part of Team Anna, and I know what happened at that time. It was my way or the highway. That doesn't work. We should have said fighting corruption and removing corruption from this country is more important. I should be seen to be fighting corruption and it should be only the instrument I bring to the table is what happened. And that should not have happened.
Right. So what you're saying is like my freedom ends with your nose, right?
Yeah.
And it's important to know that I should have the brain and the sense to know that my freedom actually ends with your nose. So I cannot take the gun in my hand, like the 17-year-old kid that you talked about. He has a gun, he's shooting at some set of people. And why is he shooting? Because his world tells him that he has got to fight it out. And that lens actually is very restrictive, very demeaning, and has consequences which are so very difficult, perhaps because now maybe the kid has been arrested, tried under the Juvenile Act, perhaps his life is shattered, his goals and aspirations of perhaps becoming a graduate and then pursuing something meaningfully enjoyable in life is kind of brought down. So as a person who's caught up in that milieu, what you're suggesting is we should now rise up to the situation, to be open in mind, not to get carried away by the emotional messages that the so-called in quotes leaders talk about, right? To be able to not fall for propaganda, not to fall for propaganda of the kind which says about human rights, about all kinds of things across from the world, when actually the reality is what you're seeing. And then to actually help calm tempers, help calm the situation in whatever way possible. If you're caught up in such a Delhi like situation, you can add value, and that's what leadership is all about. Am I right?
I go a little further than that. Actually,
Okay.
I just use that to begin my narrative.
Okay.
What we have to understand and look around us is society has built a deep level of distrust. There's so much of trust
Okay.
deficit. Whether
That's
the government doesn't trust NGOs doesn't trust government, politicians don't trust the electorate don't trust the politicians. We have a stereotyped image of a person or a sector or a domain based on our experiences or societal experiences, and we even refuse to concede the fact somebody may actually be good. So we have all come to a point in life where a lack of trust is defining our relationships. But if you actually look at it, if you look at human beings, we are all wired for trust. We begin a life's journey by trusting. A weak, insecure, completely dependent
vulnerable.
child, vulnerable child when it is born, trusts the mother to take care of it, completely surrenders that body to the mother to take care of, and grows up with the trust. Anytime it falls sick, it runs, Amma. That
Right.
there's a deep wiring of trust into every human being. But something over time, and we call it propaganda, call it narratives, call it different learnings that we
Ideology.
have, whatever it is. We all have our own packaging that we give for ourselves. But the point I'm trying to make is Just because I have my own packaging too. I'm not even discarding my packaging, but I can expand my packaging to say, I'm mindful of my packaging, and therefore I know that my truth may not be the complete truth. And I respect your packaging as much. I don't have to agree with your packaging, but I'm respectful of it. Well, this is my what my
So,
experience tells.
so what is important is that mutual respect and the trust, and anything that
Yeah.
destroys the trust, that toxicity is what needs to be worked off,
I
right?
essentially disagree with the message, disagree with the ideology. Don't disagree with the messenger.
Very good, very nice. So, sir, on that note, we kind of come to the end of this conversation between you and me, and I'd like
Mhm.
to throw open the floor to questions. And there are a lot of questions that have come up, and I'd like to read out a couple of questions which are
Sure.
there, and that's very important. Okay, so it's about 6:44, 15 minutes for questions.
Sure.
So the question that a viewer has posed is: has the meaning of the term spirituality in the current complex situation, has it changed? How will spirituality assist my leadership traits? This is the two-part question that has come from one of the viewers. So
Right.
kindly respond.
I'll sort of try to combine an answer to both. And it means a lot because I define in my book spirituality, or I define leadership as a spiritual journey. What do I mean by spirituality? And we all have different definitions. Like I said, different packagings. To me, finally, the way I've tried, I'm not an expert. I'm not even claiming to be one. But from my readings and from the training I got from various gurus in my life, I've come to understand that spirituality, in a very simplified sense, is just the practice of self-inquiry. If I were to deconstruct it and condense it and distill it out, I would say what Ramana Maharishi said, just asking ourselves the question, who am I? Asking fundamentally existential questions of oneself with the courage and the freedom and the mindfulness that this whole journey is about discovering my inner self. And that journey is what I would call spirituality. It's completely nothing to do with religion, could be an instrument through which you can seek that spirituality. Religion could frame the questions for you, religions could be the starting point, religion could start with faith in that particular words of the scriptures of that religion, and then you go on to go deeper. But to me, finally, it boils down to, am I practicing self-inquiry? So in the leadership space, I have defined, if you take out all the messages of my book, and my next book is going to elaborate how do we build it. And I call it the Eightfold Path of Leadership. It will take possibly a year for it to come out. I talk of 8 essential elements that defines leadership. The
Hmm?
first element I call it as compassion.
Okay.
Without compassion, you can't exercise leadership. And compassion is such a spiritual trait. Second, I say faith and hope.
Right.
Vivekananda says, if you have faith, you don't have faith in yourself, there's no point having faith in the 33,000 crore gods that we have. So that enormous inner faith that I'm destined to be different. I'm going to do something simple, but at the same time extraordinary. I'm humble, but I might raise up to do something different. Now, this kind of that faith in ourselves and the hope that tomorrow is going to be better. The third, I say, is spirit of sense of humor. Spirit of service is one. The spirit of self-inquiry is one. Mindfulness is one. Abhi, Vivekananda says, fearlessness is one.
Right.
And you combine all these 8 elements put together is what is demonstrably comes out as leadership. So you spoke about qualities in the early part of our discussion. Essentially, you practice it as a spiritual act. You will find yourself manifesting these qualities, not even you knowing it. And people around you will start saying, oh my God, this man is so different. Now, one thing I missed in those 8 qualities is sense of humor.
Right.
We all learn to laugh. Today, we are all wired to laugh at people. But what we learn as you evolve in this personal spiritual way of exercising leadership, you'll start learning laughing with people.
Laughing
So
with people and then laughing at yourself as well, I suppose.
I wouldn't say laughing at ourselves also, laughing about yourself with people is what I would say. So this
Okay.
ability is something very different. We don't look down on us or others. It's as
Right.
important to look up to yourself rather than just look down on yourself. We are all trained to be critical of ourselves to the
Yeah.
point where we are not even compassionate about ourselves. So these
Right.
qualities come up. To me, that is spirituality in action. That is why leadership is an extraordinary opportunity to survive in this world. And it is born out of the simple statement of Bhagavan Ramakrishna for me. He says, be like the lotus leaf in the water but untouched by it, but don't get wet by it. So leadership provides us the opportunity to be in the water, in the murky world that we have created for ourselves. But making it a spiritual way of exercising leadership means that we not get wet by what happens around us.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That's a very interesting way of approaching the whole evolution of oneself to develop the traits, if I may kind of say so. And that's how uh, the spirituality is actually the core of the spirituality, the adhyatma, the sadhana, the life journey is at the core of exhibiting the leadership traits in a spontaneous, creative way. That's the message that I get. Here's another question from another viewer, and the person is asking, how do I balance life skills needed for material success vis-a-vis life skills needed for being a good human being?
There's no difference. The moment you separate it out, there's no dichotomy at all. I think I bring this out in my book. Being a complete leader is what I call it. What does it mean? What does the completeness mean? The wholesomeness is we cannot segregate acts of leadership in four major domains that a human being operates in. I
Right.
put the domains as the domain of work, right? And most of us think leadership is only professional work related. I define work as something where you're compensated for the acts of what actions that you're performing. If you're remunerated and compensated, we can call it work. In the workplace, which is most of our lives, how do I all the leadership that I spoke about? The second domain is the family. Everybody is connected to us by blood and whom I've invested emotionally upon. And how do I really engage and interact? Understanding the self in the context of the family, understanding others around me, and understanding the action that binds the self to the others in the context of the family. I even give an example of how do you do role, how do you differentiate role from self in the book. The third, I say, is a domain of community, call it community or society, people who are not connected to you in the workplace, not professional colleagues, people that you're not invested in biologically or emotionally as a family member, but somebody else, your friends, your neighbors, how do you deal with them? How does the relationship get defined? What are the actions that bind you to them? And the last, I say the self, how do you deal with yourself?
Okay.
So in all the four domains, they're so interconnected, they're so seamless. I separate them out more for exemplifying or illustrating. But
Right.
leadership is about, you can't be a leader at workplace and not be a leader at home, or leader at the society level, but not worry about how do you manage yourself. Personal mastery. Peter Senge in his work also talks about personal mastery, and that's what Vivekananda always spoke about. So leadership is in two spaces, if I can articulate Vivekananda's words. How well you manage to control internal nature, how well you manage to control external nature. Now, external to yourself is the work, the community, and the family. Internal to yourself is yourself. All I have tried to do is put this high abstractive spiritual understanding that Swami Vivekananda describes into a more concretized application form called leadership, and say how do you deal with ourselves in these four domains.
Beautiful, beautiful. Because what I take away from this is there are situations in the pursuit of material success, like, having to go in for the kill, to be passionate, to be paranoid, if I may kind of quote the Intel founder, is what is it that we all need to do? And what you're saying is that we just need to be ourselves. And when we are truly ourselves, it spontaneously happens that we'll be able to make things happen the way which is best for us. And that's how
For,
the
for,
balance comes
for not
between,
just for us, for
I'm
self,
sorry,
others,
as
and
well as the others.
yeah,
So don't just look at yourself, but look at the whole
the
community or
context.
ecosystem or context. Beautiful. That's a very nice way. So the question, another question that another viewer has posed, I don't know who she is or who he is. The question is how to overcome guilt consciousness when someone gets affected due to competency issues by my rightful action at work. It's a very interesting thing. So I am competently exercising a choice, and that is going to affect somebody in a negative way. How do I get over the guilt consciousness? And how
I
do I?
think I have answered this a few times in this talk already. The problem comes when I start saying, I am doing something, I am acting in this situation. You
Okay.
just ask yourself what needs to be done in this situation. And you might just be an instrumentality of getting it done. So the moment you can separate role from self, let me give a little more clearer example. I'm a doctor. A patient comes to me. Immediate role relationship between the two of us is I am a physician who's expected to alleviate pain and suffering and treat him. And let's say it's my own daughter or my brother's son or something like that. If I get confused and say in this particular context is my nephew and I allow my emotions to flow and say, oh my God, he's not well and I should do something about it, I'm not playing my role. And then all the fear, the guilt, everything starts coming in. There are
Right.
two basic emotions that come in the way of exercising leadership. One is guilt and one is fear. Guilt
Right.
happens when a past action that you did in a similar circumstance in the past led you to a negative consequence, and you're riddled with the fear that if you repeat the same kind of action, now you're going to fail again. Let's say I dismiss somebody, and I give this example repeatedly in my workshops. I've headed organizations, and so I have to dismiss people. So when I'm dismissing people, it's very painful. Recently, I had to tell a person whom an organization where I chair, saying that I can't intervene with what the CEO has done. I'm not going to ask him to retain you. It's very painful. I know he's had a young child. I know he's going through difficulties, but I am playing the role in that context of the chair of that organization, whose job is to protect the organization. And I have to do justice to the role. I have to see what needs to be done, not what I should be doing.
Oh,
Similarly, let's say I dismiss somebody. I give this example. Let's say I'm a software company owner, and then there's a group of people. We are a small company and it is growing. We get a big order,
right.
and we have delivered it in 3 months or 6 months. And I tell my people, come on, let's all do it. And the man who's working day and night for it, he doesn't succeed. I deliver the product. The company doesn't pay me. I lose my temper. We have burnt the midnight oil. I come into the office very angry, call out the guy who said, what the hell did you do? You failed me. You screwed me up. You lost the company, everything. And then that fellow is shattered because he's not slept for 4 nights at a stretch. And I'm shouting at him. He quits. He was my best employee, let's say. I lose him. He says, what the hell? Who'll work for this monster? And he goes away. The next time, same thing happens, let's say. And I'm about to shout. And I'm about to say, you know what, you screwed up and you destroyed my company. Then I suddenly remember, oh my God, when this happened in the past, I lost a great employee. So now I say I will not shout at him. Because if I shout, he will quit. Now what have I done? I've allowed the guilt of the past to come in the way of my decision. I've also allowed the fear of the fact that I may lose him. That means I've already gone into the future. So I'm not at all the present. Either the past is dictating how I'm acting or the future is dictating how I'm acting. Leadership is about coming into the present and say, at this point of time, in this context, what needs to be done? If shouting
Rather
at
than
him is
what
what,
I should do. Very beautiful.
so
Beautiful.
if correcting him is what needs to be done, you'll correct him. So the simplest sentence I say, and it's there in the book very powerfully, is never let your experience influence you.
Okay.
Always allow your experience to inform you.
Okay.
See the experience as a database, see in experience as a resource provided to you. I have had people telling me, you know what, my experience is older than your age and stuff like that in company settings. I work with a lot of corporate leaders, I work with political leaders. I look at the kind of statements they make. They're so arrogantly embedded with this concept that I can solve every problem. And they have made this statement and they are so wrong because every context is unique and different. Every context is new. Every relationship is in the freshness of time, like Dev Krishnamurti says. It can never be the same between two people the next minute or next second. If you can recognize that and lead that, you'll never have this problem. You'll never have the
Beautiful.
guilt or the fear.
I think the most important takeaway here is what needs to be done versus what I'm doing. I should give up
Exactly.
that ego, what I'm doing or what I did, and what needs to be done. So even if I have a good friend who's a little incompetent and here's the axe that has to fall, the context demands that the axe has to fall. It's not that I am cutting the guy out. That's a beautiful way of understanding it and conducting oneself accordingly. Beautiful. The another short question, I think this is a very interesting question is how does a leader undo a mistake that the leader has committed?
If you go back into the past, you'll never be able to undo it. Have the courage. A leader doesn't have to think that he should never make a mistake. I think that is a fundamental flaw in the argument. You have
Okay.
done something, it has not worked. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. I write a chapter in the book called Vulnerability and Leadership. The
Right.
problem is we think I cannot fail. I'm invincible. I have to always succeed. You know, that's what the CEO is paid for. He's supposed to make the company great. But I think allow yourself to understand that when I'm an ordinary human being, I can fail too. There is no human being with the bandwidth in this world who can succeed at every point of time. Having the humility and the courage to say, I screwed up, is great leadership. Allowing yourself the freedom to say, I don't have to succeed all the time is great leadership. Giving yourself the knowledge to say, my competence may not be the only thing that will work in this situation. There may be things which I don't know. So acquiring more, if you allow yourself to feel incompetent, you'll seek out to learn more competences. Otherwise, you'll never do it. So I think it's not about failing. It's about understanding and giving yourself the permission to fail. And that is
Right.
what leadership is all about.
Okay. That sounds very nice and idealistic, but then in reality, those guys who are kind of in the mad pursuit of materialistic success, may not be able to digest what you gave us wisdom in an easy way. But then digesting will not cause indigestion and therefore the attendant problems. And that's what makes a leader smile at tough situations and still succeed, though he looks so vulnerable and so very whatever. And I think on that's a very interesting thing. So I really appreciate, sir, for you having taken time off. It's just about 7 o'clock in another minute, and I have only two questions to ask you before we close off. Right now, leadership is such a very fuzzy, very subtle, very difficult thing to think about, to capture, and all that. And in fact, one of the biggest challenges that ordinary citizens of our country face is the inability to really get a good grasp of what this leadership thing is about and how to bring it out from within themselves. That is point one. So the question is, how does one try to crack that nut? So fuzzy, so difficult to articulate. Second, and this is more important, as a writer, I'm sure you must have had a writer's block, right? And when it comes to such fuzzy things, because leadership, talking about leadership is like kite flying. You kind of do some vaporware in the air and then you convincingly talk when we have the gift of gab and then feel good about it. But practically, what difference has it made? That kind of thing comes. So these two questions before we close.
I'll try to answer it the way I understood your question, and I'll
Right.
try to re-articulate it. First is, second part of the second question is first. Uh, the writer's block, how do you block, how do you write? Do you have the block? And or just intellectualization. To me, leadership is a lived experience. So
Beautiful.
what I've written comes from the heart, and when it comes, it flows. And I never write to finish a book. I never written any of my books. I never written to write a book. In fact, the first book in the preface I wrote to maintain my sanity. I didn't write the book for somebody to read it. So
Beautiful.
when it is not about writing a book for somebody to read, it's only about sharing your thoughts, what drives you something else. In the
Right.
leadership book, for me, I thought these messages are stories which I thought were powerful lessons for me. And I just shared it with my wife who saw meaning in it and sense in it. And she said, maybe it'll help other people if they can get to it. And so my intent was this sharing the story. It was not about what will happen if I share the story. Will they appreciate it? The book become a bestseller, or will they read it and make it in practical in daily life? Those are outcomes I never really bothered about. Writing the book, I had to give my 100%. So every time I had an anecdotal experience, an immersive experience, something which changed my life, I just put it down on paper.
Beautiful.
It took a year and a half or more longer. Then aggregating all of that into a book form is what took under 6 to 9 months. The first question, if you can repeat it again so that I can come back to it.
The first question is the fact that leadership is such a
A fuzzy
subtle,
subject, yeah.
fuzzy,
It is not. I
vague
got it.
thing,
I
right?
understand. I remember the question now. It's not actually fuzzy. It's only as fuzzy as you make it out to be.
Okay.
And then it's actually very simple. Just
Mhm.
don't pretend to be extraordinary.
Okay.
Be just ordinary, be humble. And sometimes extraordinary demands come off you. Deliver to the demand without thinking you're extraordinary. If you think you're ordinary and you feel that, oh my God, I can't do this, you'll go into your shell. If you think I'm extraordinary, I'll be extraordinary all the time, also you will become a flashy spectator, a spectator sport kind of a guy, but not really doing anything. Just said this is a powerful opportunity to demonstrate the inner extraordinariness. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be extraordinary all the time and I have to live to become extraordinary. I'm just a product of God's creation. And He's made me in His image, which means I have the extraordinariness inside me. Whenever I can manifest the potential for societal benefit, I do it. So, in simplistically, there's only one statement I would like to end this with. Leadership to me is one message of Swami Vivekananda, which he writes it so powerfully in a letter to the Mysore Maharaja. You know, living a life for others, that's all matters. He
Right.
said, he alone lives who lives for others. The rest are more dead than alive.
Right.
Leadership is about others. It's not about you. The moment you make it about you, you're a counterfeit leader. The moment
Beautiful.
you live your life for everybody else, you're exercising leadership. And that's the simplest message I can give. Before
Wonderful.
in conclusion, I thought I just want to add a small word. And you were showing my book, and I'd like to show it. And I'd like to show these birds flying.
Good. Right.
It's a message from nature, so
Right.
beautifully captured by one of a young woman called Georgina, who was inspired, and she wrote, and she captured my message in the art form. These are swans which fly in this formation, and I explained that in the cover of the book. And there's no leader here. It's just that somebody has to show the way. Somebody is wired in that context. That person in the front shows the way, breaks the wake, and then it makes it easy for everybody else to fly. There are no followers. Birds coming behind are not followers. When the person in the front of the formation, the bird in the front of the formation gets tired, she knows that now it's not her turn to continue to be a leader. She or he gently steps aside, and the bird takes its position. So there's no struggle for leadership. It's such a beautiful expression. I think nature is teaching us so much. All we need to do is learn from nature, which is also spiritual. And therefore, leadership, even in this art form, going towards the light, clearly knowing that I'm neither the leader nor the follower. I am both. I am neither. If you can do this, that is the simple message of leadership. And so, thank you
Beautiful.
so much, Mohan, for
Beautiful.
walking me through this
Beautiful.
journey.
In fact, I would kind of say the bottom line is don't break head about this thing called leadership. Just do it. Just do it for others. What is best possible, keeping the larger goal in mind. That's all that is there to it. So nothing more than that. On that note, I think the biggest leadership lesson in life for daily living is that last few words that I could juice out of what you said. On that note, a very big thank you, sir, for having joined us at the Indian Institute of World Culture conversations of a book this evening, 20th of March 2021. And I'd like to thank all the viewers in Facebook, all the viewers in YouTube, all the viewers in Zoom call for having patiently uh, taken the wisdom that Dr. R. Balasubramaniam shared with us through his book. And I would also like to thank the organized, meaning the organization, Indian Institute of World Culture, the volunteers, the staff members, the executive committee members for this beautiful opportunity that we have had Dr. R. Balasubramaniam come and share with us. On that note, a very big thank you. Vande Mataram, Jai Hind.
Again,
Namaste.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.